Praise God. Again, welcome everybody to Open Arms Community Church, those that are joining us here today and those that are joining us online, those in our Port Allegheny church family, those on YouTube and Facebook Live. We're just really excited that you're joining us today. Today, we are in a fake news special edition. This is an extension of a series that we have started through the Christmas season, explaining the certainty of our faith, that there is a rationality and a reasonability and a confidence that we can have in this Christian faith. And today we're going to do a special edition of that. I'm going to invite Chris Miller to come on up here. A quick introduction to Chris is that he is a petroleum engineer and has his own story of coming to faith in Jesus Christ that I won't steal any thunder from. But Chris has done over 700 of these lectures, speeches, and so I am just really pumped about the opportunity for him to share with us today. So I'm going to invite Chris up, and if you'll give him your applause and thanks for joining us here today, we'll get started.
Hey, Mike. Well, good morning, everyone. Great to be here. I love speaking about creation and evolution. Beginning with, I just want to go over a little bit about my beliefs on this subject so you know where I'm coming from. I believe in creation. I give God full credit for his creation, just the way he said he did it in his word. But there was a time when I believed in evolution instead. Actually, I was a very strong believer in evolution. In fact, I can tell you with certainty, there is no one on earth who believes in evolution more strongly than I did. And the reason I can say that is because I was 100% convinced that evolution was true. I had absolutely no doubts whatsoever about the truth of evolution. So back then, when people did not believe in evolution, I thought they were wrong, so I would try to correct them. I tried to persuade people to believe in evolution. I can remember poking fun at my wife, Sandy, because she believed in creation. But today, I believe in creation. So as you can see, I've been on both sides of this issue in a big way. Now, right now I want to talk to you a little bit about this gentleman, Edward Wilson. He's up in his 90s now, but he's a well-known scientist. He's been a research scientist at Harvard University for most of his career, and he's written over 100 books that have been published. He's won Pulitzer Prizes for 2 of those, so he's a 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner. Very brilliant scientist. He's an evolution scientist, so I think he's somewhat misguided on some things, but that doesn't take away from his intelligence. He's a very intelligent human being. And when other evolution scientists write about evolution, they often quote some of his writings. So I want to show you his story as told in his own words. As were many persons from Alabama, I was a born-again Christian. When I was 15, I entered the Southern Baptist Church with great fervor and interest in fundamentalist religion. I left at 17 when I got to the University of Alabama and heard about evolution. Now, I'm not going to speak on whether or not Dr. Wilson was really born again, but he said he had great fervor and interest in his Christian faith until something happened. What happened? He was taught evolution. What is about the teaching of evolution that turns people away from the faith? You may know somebody like that. It might be a son or daughter, niece, nephew, a sibling. What is it? Actually, my story is not much different than Dr. Wilson's. The only big difference with my story is after about 10 years, I once again came around to believing God's version of what happened in the past. So what is it? Well, it gets to how they teach it, and again, this talk kind of deals with that. And I titled this talk, The Core of Evolution. Now, I'll explain what that is in a few minutes, but for now, suffice to say that what I mean by the core of evolution is something that is at the very, very beginning of evolution. Without this one thing, even evolution scientists would say evolution wouldn't stand a chance, couldn't happen, could go no place. So it gets to the very core. And again, I'll explain what it is in a few minutes. But first, I want to talk to you about this building. This is the Freedom Tower. It's the tallest building in the United States. And it stands at ground zero. Actually, it was built to replace the 2 towers that were destroyed in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And it is a marvel of human ingenuity. A lot of new technology went into building this thing. And it was a multi-year building project. It took 8 years to build that. And before that, it took 2 years just to drop the blueprints, which, of course, are the instructions on how to build it. So 2 years to write the instructions and another 8 years to build it. And you can see it being built on the internet with time-lapse photography, different versions of it. The one I watched took 90 seconds. And 90 seconds, they rapidly showed hundreds of pictures of this being built from the bottom up. It actually starts underground, and then you watch it real quick, and as it grows and grows and grows until after about 8 years, it grows to full height. Truly a multi-year building project. Now, I want to compare this multi-year building project with another multi-year building project. This other building project took 16 years to build up to full height, and that would be the building of me. I had to be built. I didn't just show up one day with this big, beautiful body. I had to be built, and it took about 16 years. Now, the first 9 months, I was being built inside my mother, but all told, it took about 16 years for me to be built up to full height. So I want to compare these two multi-year building projects, the building of the Freedom Tower and the building of me. I want to compare 3 things about us. I want to look at the instructions that were needed to build each of us. I want to look at the materials that were used to build each of us. And I want to look at the builders who put us together. So let's start with the Freedom Tower. What were the instructions to build the Freedom Tower? Well, they were the blueprints. And they were massive. And if you put them in a book form, it would fill up a large book. So think of the instructions for building Freedom Tower, the blueprints, as a large book of instructions on how to build that. And very important. I mean, you could get all the builders you want out to ground zero to build the Freedom Tower. And the first question they have is, well, where are the blueprints? Where are the instructions for building this thing? So you see, the instructions are very important for building the Freedom Tower. They're also very important for building me. I was built according to a set of instructions. We call my instructions my DNA. But isn't that what DNA is? DNA, that's the instructions on how to build me. We each have our own set of instructions. It's called your DNA. Very important. Actually, it turns out I have many copies of my instruction book. Almost every somatic cell in my body has a complete copy of my entire instruction book, which means I have about 100 trillion copies of my instruction book. And each one by itself has all the instructions for building me. In fact, scientists say that one day they'll be able to clone, they're very close to it now, that one day they'll be able to clone an entire me just from one copy of my DNA, one copy of my instruction book. If they say you could take 100 copies of my DNA, remember I have 100 trillion of them, they could take 100 copies of them and clone 100 of me just like me. What a scary thought, I know. But that just shows you that everything needed to build a human being, all the instructions have to be in every copy of that DNA. So I'm going to call this my DNA, this book here. Again, think of it as a book because that's essentially what it is. It's a set of instructions. And so I'm going to put this right here. And that's a copy of my instruction book, my DNA, how to build me. Remember, everything about me is in this book. Everything on how to build me is in that book. It has to be. We can't understand it all, but it's in there. So let me just talk a little more about this book, the human instruction book, what we call DNA. Scientists have been studying this for many years, and they've found out some things about it. One thing they found out is that there's a lot more to find out about it. In fact, geneticists will tell you that it looks like now we barely scratched the surface on this. There's so much information in this, but they can't figure it out. They know it's in there because they know what it can do, but they can't quite figure it out. But let me show you some things they have found out about DNA. They found out that like most instruction books, or in fact, like all instruction books, it is written in a language. Absolutely. They call it the genetic language. But make no mistake, it is just as much a language as English or French or Spanish or German or Greek. It is a language. And like most languages, they found out it has an alphabet. It uses an alphabet of 4 letters. English language uses an alphabet of 26 letters. Greek language uses an alphabet of 20 letters. This language, the genetic language, uses an alphabet of just 4 letters. So this entire book, what we call DNA, this entire book utilizes 4 different letters. They're chemicals, but the 4 different chemicals. It doesn't matter what letters look like, by the way. I mean, compare the letters in in the English language to the letters in the Greek language or the letters in the Chinese language. You see, it doesn't matter. You could use 4 different colored marbles. It doesn't matter. It's just how they're arranged. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But it's a big book. I mean, it's compressed into a microscopic dot. But if you can unfold that with a powerful enough microscope, you see it's a huge book. It contains 6 billion letters. Only 4 different ones, but 6 billion letters. That's enough to fill up 14,000 average-sized books. But remember, there's a lot of information on this. There's enough information to build an entire human being, everything about me. And what matters is how these letters, they're not just a bunch of letters. They're letters that are arranged in order. And it's the order of the letters that makes all the difference in the world. So I want to show you just how that works. Here's a box of alphabet cereal. Alphabet cereal, it's a cereal that's shaped like letters. Each piece of cereal is shaped like a letter of the alphabet. Now, if I was to pour a bowl of cereal, similar to what I would eat for breakfast in the morning, I'm a pretty big eater. Okay, there. Now, there are thousands of letters in this bowl. How much information is in this bowl? None. No information at all, but yet there's thousands of letters. But if I was to take this same bowl of letters and pour it out on a large table, and then very carefully arrange the letters into words, and then into sentences, and then into paragraphs, pretty soon I'd have a story to tell. I might tell what I did yesterday, or what I hope to do tomorrow, or how to make a cake. In other words, there'd be information. Same letters, but now they contain information. What's the difference? The difference is they are in order. Well, that's what it is with my DNA. It's not just a pile of chemicals. They're chemicals that are in order. And you will see it's an order more complex than anything the mind of man has ever written, has ever developed, has ever even thought about developing. These letters are in such a complex order, it's beyond our imagination. And you'll see that as I go on. Okay. Now, let's go back to this comparison. Let's go back to the Freedom Tower. What are the materials that were needed to build the Freedom Tower? Well, materials were many, and they had to be brought in from all over the place. Some had to be shipped in from overseas. Okay, how about me? What were the materials that were needed to build me? Well, this might rock your socks a little bit. The only material needed to build me was food. Just food. Everything to build me you could get from the corner grocery store or from the family farm. Now, how can that be? I'm much more complex than the Freedom Tower, but the Freedom Tower had the materials brought in from all over the place. But with me, you get everything from the local 7-Eleven. How can that be? Well, let me explain how that can be. As it turns out, this instruction book, what we call DNA, is so complex, contains so much complex information, that it has the information on how to take food and break it down, sometimes with individual molecules. And then it has the information on how to take some and keep and some to get rid of. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine writing a book on how to take food and build a human being? Well, that's what this does. All the information necessary to take food and build a human being has to be in this book somehow. Otherwise, it wouldn't be here. How about Freedom Tower? How about the builders that were needed to build the Freedom Tower? Well, the builders were many. It was like a small army out there. Sane and I went out there when they were just starting to rebuild that thing. There were equipment operators, welders, electricians, plumbers, architects, engineers, just a small army of highly skilled, highly trained workers is what it took to put the Freedom Tower together. Okay, what was the army of highly skilled, highly trained workers that were needed to put me together? None. There wasn't anybody there. There was nobody there to say, put this here, put that here, put this here. You know what that means? It means I was built automatically. That means this instruction book was written in such a way to build an entire human being automatically. There was nobody there to say, put this here, put that here, put this here. It was all done automatically. Can you imagine how complex information that would take to do that? But yet that's what went on. And let me tell you some other things that are in this book. How about if I cut my finger? What happens? It heals. What's that mean? If you're taking notes, you might want to Google later, ask a biologist how to heal a cut, or how a cut heals. I did that the other day. It's amazing. All the steps, everything goes on to heal a cut. It's amazing what goes on. Now, how does it know to do that? Because it's all written out in this instruction book. If we took those 100 clones of me I talked to you about and cut each of our fingers the same way, we'd all heal the same way, which means the information on how to heal a cut is written out in that instruction book somehow. How about if I catch a cold, which I might have a little bit of one now. Well, how if I catch a cold? You always hear doctors say there's no cure for the common cold. Don't believe that, folks. There is a cure for the common cold. I know there's a cure for the common cold because I've been cured of several common colds. Now, doctors don't know how to cure a common cold, but my instruction book does. You could give all 100 of my clones the same cold, and we'd all get healed, cured the same way. Which means the instructions on how to cure a common cold have to be written in this book somehow. Just because we can't understand doesn't mean it's not in there. How about my eyes? My eyes are more complex than a color television. And yet the instructions for building them are written in here. Otherwise, I wouldn't have eyes. How about my heart? My heart is capable of pumping blood at variable speed, depending on demand, 24/7 for as much as 100 years, nonstop. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the instructions in here on how to build a heart? Out of food? Automatically? And yet we know it's in there. If the instructions weren't in there to build a heart, I wouldn't have a heart. It'd be like the Tin Man on The Wizard of Oz. One more. How about my brain? I want to talk a little more depth on the brain because this is amazing. This is a life-size model of a brain, and it weighs about 3 pounds. A real brain weighs about 3 pounds. And let me tell you some stuff about the brain. The brain contains 100 billion neurons, which are specialized brain cells. And out of each neuron, there's wires, actual wires. They're very thin, but there's like 10,000 wires coming out of each one of these neurons, which adds up to about 1 quadrillion connections. 1 quadrillion little wires connected to other neurons so they can communicate with each other so you can do certain things. If you were to take all the wires out of my brain and put them together end to end, they would stretch 100,000 miles. That's enough to wrap around the earth at the equator 4.5 times. That's how much wire is in your brain. It's amazing, folks. It's just amazing. And it's like a massive web of circuitry which gives us the ability to think, to remember things, to reason, to love, to hate, to run everything. It's like a master control center. Even when we're asleep, it's controlling a whole bunch of things all at once. It's controlling our heart rate, our breathing rate, our perspiration, so keep it at even temperature. Just a whole bunch of processes are being controlled all the time by this brain, even when we're asleep. It's amazing. And if you Google what is the most complex thing in the universe, because I've done this, website after website after website will come up and say, the human brain. But they're all wrong. How can the human brain be the most complex thing in the universe when there's a microscopic dot that has the instructions on how to build the brain automatically out of food? Isn't that much more complex? What's more complex? A 3-pound brain that can do all this amazing stuff? Or that microscopic dot that has all the instructions written out on how to build that thing automatically? This instruction book that we call DNA is more complex than anything the mind of man has ever even thought about writing. It is complex beyond our imagination. So where do we get it from? Where did we get this thing that's so complex it's beyond our imagination. Where do we get it from? Well, this is one thing that all scientists agree on. I got my instruction book half from mom and half from dad. In fact, I have 6 siblings, and all 7 of us can say we got half our instruction book from mom and half from dad. We all got slightly different halves. That's why we're all a little bit different. But we all got half from mom and half from dad. Well, where did mom and dad get their instruction books from? Well, they got it from their moms and dads, who in turn got it handed down to them from their moms and dads, who got it handed down to them from their moms and dads. Anyway, all the way back to our earliest ancestors. Okay, who were my earliest ancestors? Well, that's one question you'll answer differently depending on whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist. If you're a creationist like me, you'll say that your earliest ancestors were Adam and Eve, and that Adam and Eve hand their instruction books all the way down to me. So where did Adam and Eve get their instruction books from? Well, I believe that God wrote their instruction books, in a sense. I believe that God wrote Adam's instruction book, gave it to him, and I believe that God wrote Eve's instruction book and gave it to her, and then Adam and Eve took their instruction books, which were written by God, handed them down to their children, who then handed them down to their children, who then handed them down to their children, all the way down to me. So in other words, I believe the ultimate author of this instruction book was God himself, the only one capable of writing something this complex or anything close to this complex. Okay, how about evolutionists? Who do they say our earliest ancestors were? Well, certainly not Adam and Eve. No, they believe that our earliest ancestors were bacteria, microscopic bacteria. Let me show you. This is from the Buffalo newspaper. According to evolution, bacteria are the oldest and simplest living creatures and are the common ancestor of all plants and animals. So according to evolution, microscopic bacteria, or some other microbe, handed their instruction books down, their DNA, all the way down to me. So let's call this bacteria DNA, the instruction book for building bacteria. And we'll put this right here next to my DNA. Now, I did some research on this, and it turns out that my instruction book is 18,000 times bigger than that of the simplest bacterium. 18,000 times bigger, and much more complex. My instruction book has the instructions on how to build a heart, a brain, eyes, lungs. This has none of that. So not only is my instruction book 18,000 times bigger, it's much, much more complex than that for a bacterium. So according to evolutionists, how did this relatively small and simple book change into this huge, much more complex book? Well, here's where we get to the very core of evolution. According to evolution, this book changed this book by a series of copy mistakes. Billions upon billions of copy mistakes. They call these copy mistakes mutations. Mutations sounds like a fancy word, but any time you see the word mutations, you can take it out and replace it with copy mistakes, because that's all it means. Copy mistakes in DNA. Now, when you hand DNA down from one generation to the next generation, what you're doing is you make a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. And what happens when you make copies of copies of copies of copies? You get mistakes, copy mistakes. And that does happen in DNA. And evolution scientists believe that those copy mistakes is what provide the material to change this relatively small, simple book into this massive, extremely complex book. Okay, so let's talk about that. Can copy mistakes, can they even improve instruction books? Well, let's take a look. Let's look at 3 different types of instruction books to see if that can happen. Each one more complex than the one before. Let's start with the simplest one. The instructions for making a cake recipe. Would a copy mistake in a cake recipe ever result in a better cake? Well, let's pretend for a minute that I was over to Aunt Alice's house for dinner. And after dinner, Alice serves cake. And I taste that cake. Boy, that's good cake. Alice, can I please have a copy of your recipe? And Alice says, of course you can. So she takes out a piece of paper and copies over a recipe for me. And then a few days later at home, I decided to try to make that cake myself. But unknown to me, when Alice copied over her recipe, she accidentally made a copy mistake. Now, as a result of that copy mistake, would I get a better cake or a worse cake? Well, probably a worse cake, right? Maybe instead of 1 cup of sugar, she actually wrote 1 cup of pepper. Or instead of bake at 350, she actually wrote bake at 850. I don't know, but I'm not a cook. But the point is, most likely I get a worse cake. But isn't it possible that I could get a better cake? Maybe instead of 1 cup of sugar, she actually wrote 2 cups of sugar. Maybe a sweeter cake would be better. Again, I'm not a cook, so I don't. But I think the point is, I think most people would agree that although unlikely, extremely unlikely, it is remotely possible that a copy mistake could result in a better cake. But that's for something simple like a cake. Let's go to something more complex. Let's go to instructions for building the computer. In fact, let's just talk about one part of the computer. Let's talk about this part, the processor. I call this the brain of the computer because it's inside here that all the calculations take place. Now, the instructions for building this processor are massive and very complex compared to a cake. Would a copy mistake in these instructions result in a better processor? No way. Let me tell you a true story about this one. I have a relative who works for Intel. Intel is one of the leading manufacturers in the world for computer processors. And one time he was back this way for a family reunion, and I was talking to him about his employment. I was just fascinated. It turns out he was on a team of other scientists whose assignment was very simple. They were to take Intel's best processor and make it better, faster, more efficient. And he was telling me about how they do this, and I was just fascinated. I'm really interested in that stuff. He couldn't tell me everything because of trade secrets, but he told me what he could. But after a while, I decided to joke with him a little bit. I tend to do that. And I said, instead of Intel spending millions of dollars on all you scientists to develop a better processor, why doesn't Intel save most of that money? Instead, just take the instructions for the best processor, generate a random copy mistake, and see if that'll do it. See if they'll get a better processor. If that doesn't, just keep trying it over and over again until they get a better processor. And he looks at me like, what's going on with Chris? Has he been tipping a few? Or? And then he saw me smile, and he realized I was just joking. But why at first did he think I was losing it? Because he knows, and I know, and folks, you know, you'll never get a better computer processor with a random copy mistake. You could try it 1,000,000 times, and you wouldn't get a better processor. You could try it 1,000,000 times, and you wouldn't get a better processor. Why? Because unlike a cake recipe, this is much more complex. As he went on to say, he said, Chris, each part of these instructions affect other parts of the instructions, and many parts affect each part. He says, if we make a change, it doesn't matter what change we make, any change we make makes things worse. The only way we can make these instructions better is we make the change we're looking for and then make a whole lot of other changes and make it mesh together. Because by itself, he says, any change is detrimental. He says, it's a big process to make any change at all because you have to do so many things all at once. Okay, so you would never expect a copy mistake to make something as complex as a computer even more complex. But let's go to something even more complex than a computer. Let's go to the instructions for life. The instructions for life, even the simplest of life, is by far more complex than the instructions for building a computer. In fact, the gap in complexity between the computer and a life is by far greater than the gap in complexity between a cake and a computer. So if you would not expect a copy mistake in a computer processor instructions to result in a better processor, how could you ever expect a copy mistake to make life more complex? Let me show you something Albert Sense Georgi said about this. Georgi was a very famous scientist in his day. In fact, he's the scientist who first discovered vitamin C. He also won a Nobel Prize in physiology. So he's a Nobel laureate, which makes him one of the smartest of the smarts in the science world. Let me show you what he said about random copy mistakes in life, mutations. Saying a living organism can be improved by random mutation of one link is like saying you could improve a Swiss watch by dropping it and thus bending one of its wheels or axles. To get a better watch, all the wheels must be changed simultaneously to make a good fit again. So again, folks, you would never expect a copy mistake to ever make something as complex as life even more complex. And yet that's the very core of evolution. Everything about evolution depends on that very thing happening. So for over 100 years now, they've been doing these mutation experiments to try to convince themselves and convince us that mutations, copy mistakes, really can improve something like life, make it more complex. In these experiments over the last 110 years or so, they usually use fruit flies, and that's because fruit flies have a short gestation period of about 12 days. In other words, every 12 days they get a new generation. It's kind of a way of fast-forwarding evolution, if evolution will really take place in the laboratory. Another way they try to fast-forward evolution is by increasing the mutation rate, get the fruit flies to make more copy mistakes. And they do this by heating them with radiation and chemicals to get them to mutate faster, make more copy mistakes. And they've been successful in getting a lot of copy mistakes. They've gotten over 1 million copy mistakes to take place in the laboratory on these fruit flies. Actually, millions of them. But through all that, over the 100 years, all these mutations, all these copy mistakes, what have they gotten fruit flies to change into? Fruit flies. They haven't even gotten fruit flies to change into a house fly. Just fruit flies. Even when combined with selection, because that's what they do. They combine the mutations plus selection. Even when combined with selection, they have not even gotten a better fruit fly. Listen to what I just said. Over 100 years of experiments by thousands of scientists involving millions of mutations, and they haven't even gotten a better fruit fly. So you can see, in spite of all the hype that you hear about mutations, as it turns out, mutations have not provided any evidence whatsoever for the theory of evolution. And yet that's the very core of evolution. Everything about evolution depends on that very thing happening. And yet all their experiments say no. So how do they teach this? How do they teach this to the students? Because they're very effective in convincing students that evolution is true. How do they teach this evolution when the very core of evolution falls flat? All their experiments say no. Well, let me show you an example. This is a biology book that's been used to teach evolution in schools. Textbooks are usually very expensive, but I got this one at a used bookstore for cheap because it was slightly out of print. But before it went out of print, it was used at many schools throughout the country. Thousands of students would have been taught evolution from various copies of this book. Now, I don't know which school this particular copy was used at because the student did not put the name of her school in here. But she did put her name in here and where she lived. So this book was used by Colleen Hyde, and when she was learning evolution with this book, she was living in room 155 of East Hall. A lot of colleges have East Hall, so I still don't know what college she's going to. But Colleen Hyde and thousands of other students were taught evolution, the core of evolution, from copies of this book. How they do it? Let me show you. I'm going to read this over once, then I'm going to go back over it piece by piece. The fact that there is no limit to advance and change in living organisms indicates that there must be some mode of gene change. This mode is mutation. The navel orange is the result of mutation in the bud of an orange tree in South America that caused the tree to produce one branch with these large seedless oranges. So let me back up. The author starts out by saying something is a fact. What is that fact? The fact that there is no limit to advance and change in living organisms. Wait a minute. Isn't that evolution? Isn't it evolution that says there is no limit to change? Isn't it evolution that says that bacteria have changed into people and that eventually we're going to change into something that's on Star Wars? Isn't that what evolution says? Now here I thought evolution was a theory. He's telling the students evolution is a fact. And because evolution is a fact, he says that there must be some mode of gene change. This mode is mutation. Now, I want you to look at an example he gives of a mutation to back up his fact of evolution. The navel orange is the result of mutation in the bud of an orange tree in South America that caused the tree to produce one branch with these large seedless oranges. Okay. Did a mutation take place in that bud of an orange tree in South America? Absolutely. That's why we have navel oranges today. but was it the type of mutation that provides evidence for evolution? Because that's how it's being used here. In other words, did this mutation somehow cause new complex information to be generated? Because that's what it would take to change this book into this book, which is what evolution is all about. Well, let's find out. I think you all know what navel oranges are. They're these oranges that don't have any seeds in them. I like navel oranges because when I eat an orange, I don't like picking out the seeds. But have you ever wondered how a navel orange tree reproduces? It doesn't have any seeds. Well, the answer is it can't. It can't reproduce. People have to help it. People have to take a seed from a regular tree, plant it in the dirt. When the tree gets a certain size, they chop it off and splice in a twig from an existing navel orange tree. That technique is called grafting. Do you realize that if people quit helping the navel orange tree to reproduce, then almost every navel orange tree in the world would go extinct in a single generation? Does that sound like a good mutation? Well, I think it's a good mutation because I like navel oranges. But that wasn't the question, was it? The question wasn't, is it a good mutation or a bad mutation? In the final analysis, that has nothing to do with it. The only thing that matters is it the type of mutation that provides evidence for evolution? Because that's how the authors use it. In other words, did this mutation somehow cause new complex information to be generated? Because that's what it would take to change this book into this book. Well, let's find out. The orange tree, just like any form of life, has an instruction book on how to build itself. It's called orange DNA. Now, inside this instruction book, somewhere in there has to be instructions on how to build seeds and put them in the oranges. Here it is right here, so to speak. What happened to this part of the instruction book, the part that tells us how to build seeds? Did it become more complex? Was new information generated? No. It was destroyed, right? This instruction book, this orange DNA, used to have instructions on how to build seeds. No, it doesn't. That information was destroyed, or at least turned off. How is that evolution? How does that have anything to do in support of evolution? Evolution requires new information, new complexity to be put into the book, not the destruction or the turning off of existing information. It's going the wrong way. Do you see what went on here? This author of this book took an example of a mutation, which is just the opposite of evolution, going the wrong way, and presented it to the students as evidence in favor of evolution. What kind of logic is that? That's backward logic. That's twisted logic. But do you think Colleen Hyde, as she was studying from this book in room 155 East Hall, picked up on the backward logic that is being used on her by the author of this book? I doubt it. Not many students do. When I was in school, I was given examples like this. By the time I got out of school, I believed in evolution with all my heart. And it wasn't until nearly 10 years later that I even began to question it. And I want to tell you, it's not just in textbooks that this type of twisted backward logic is used. Here's the USA Today newspaper from a while back. USA Today newspaper, by the way, is read by millions of people every day. In this issue, there's an article about a cave in Romania that they dug up. Before they dug it up, they say that it must have been sealed off for millions of years. That's what they say, anyway. And during that time, they say that evolution took place in that cave. And they give two examples, just two examples in the article, to back up their claim that evolution took place in that cave. Both examples have to do with a scorpion. Let me show you. Scientists have discovered an underground biological realm that has been isolated for 5 million years and that has evolved a food chain that doesn't depend on sunlight. The scorpion differs from its above-ground cousin and it has no eyes and no pigment. Okay. Did mutations take place in that cave? Probably. It looks that way. But were they the type of mutations that provide evidence for the theory of evolution? Because that's how they're being used here. In other words, did these mutations somehow cause new complex information to be developed? Because that's what it would take to change this book into this book. Well, let's find out. The scorpion, just like any form of life, has an instruction book on how to build itself. It's called Scorpion DNA. Now, inside this instruction book on how to build scorpions, somewhere in here, there has to be instructions on how to build eyes. There has to be instructions on how to make pigment. What happened to those two parts of the instruction book? Did they become more complex? Was new information generated? No. I'm not going to rip any more pages out of my book. but I think you get the point. This was not evolution. This was the opposite of evolution. Evolution requires new information to be put into the book, not the destruction or turning off of existing information. It's going the wrong way. Now, the USA Today newspaper is read by millions of people every day. How many of them, you suppose, picked up on the backward logic that's being used on them by the author of this article? Some, perhaps. But for many, all it did was either strengthen their faith in evolution or weaken their belief in creation. Finally, I want to show you a pile of rocks. Now, this pile of rocks is called a cairn. I like cairns. In my spare time this summer, I like to go to the Adirondacks up by Lake Placid and climb what they call the high peaks, these mountains up there. And I took this picture partway up a mountain, and this is what these cairns are. They help mark the trails. Some of the trails are a little hard to follow, but people have gone before me, have put rocks in piles called a cairn to show me where the trail goes, where it turns, and so forth. And but when I see one of these, I know beyond any doubt that someone put it there. I know beyond any doubt it didn't get there by itself. A tornado didn't whip up a bunch of stones and land them that way. Stones didn't roll off the mountain and land that way. Because why? Because there's too much order to this. I can tell by looking at this, without any doubt whatsoever, that someone with some intelligence put it together because there's too much order to have happened by accident. Even evolution scientists would agree, by the way. Even evolution scientists would say that had to be put together by order. In fact, if an evolution scientist was looking through some new powerful telescope at some planet we've never been to and saw this on that planet, you know what would happen? Within a few days, this picture would show up on the front page of every newspaper in the world with a headline, "We are not alone. We have found proof of extraterrestrial intelligence." And what would that proof be? Pile of rocks. Now, wait a minute. They can look at a pile of rocks and say that's proof of intelligence, meaning it could not happen by accident. And yet, instead of a telescope, they look through a microscope at 6 billion letters in an order more complex than anything mind of man has ever come up with, complex beyond our imagination. They look at that and say, no intelligence necessary. That was done by chance. Unbelievable, but that's what would happen, folks. Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at a painting that you know right away it was done by an artist, right? And if you look at a sculpture, you know right away it was done by a sculptor. And when you look at a book, you know right away it was written by an author. And when that book is more complex than anything mind of man has ever written, complex beyond imagination, then you know the author was someone of supreme intelligence, someone that puts us all to shame, someone who could be none other than God himself, the only one capable of writing something this complex. And we need to give God credit, for God is the author of DNA. God is the author of all creation. And we need to give God credit for his creation, because to do otherwise, to give the credit elsewhere, is an insult. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Pastor Mike, you close. Thank you.
Man, let's thank Chris. To give credit to anything else is not only an insult to the Creator, but isn't it illogical? The crazy thing is, as you saw Chris handling this and then this book, there's a DNA code. There's an instruction for everything in all creation, planet Earth and beyond. Where did it all come from? Flukes of nature? Accidents? Mistakes? Or did it come from intelligence? Here's the thing. This points us to a creator. But who is that creator? The Bible says that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the Bible is the unfolding of God's story. What he did, why he did it, and how he did it, to a limited degree. The truth is that the one who made all this is even more complex than what he made. And in our human endeavors to, as finite beings, to understand the infinite, we can also oftentimes find ourselves not knowing answers and struggling with the mystery. Today, I just want to encourage you that there are answers. You've heard some explanation, and there's a lot more for us to grow and mature in. Some of us, this is the first time we heard anything like this. For others, this just builds upon information that we have heard in days and months and years gone by. But for all of us, we're brought to this place where we have to accept we don't even fully understand ourselves and how we were made and how we work. What makes us think we'll fully understand the infinite God, the eternal, the one that made it all? And I share that with you to encourage you to find peace in the mystery. Here's what we know, is that there is stuff we do know. And what God has revealed tells us this, that the same God that made all creation continues to make each one of us uniquely, fearfully, and wonderfully in the wombs of our mothers, knitting us together with our own unique code and manual. What it does tell us is that unquantifiable, untouchable by any scalpel is the conscience, the spirit, the will of man that is free. Free to be whoever we want to be and to do whatever we want to do, even reject God. And the Bible tells us that in one way or another, we have all done that. And this same God that created on purpose so that we could be a part of his family. But how many know love isn't love if it's forced? It's a choice. And so he gave us this capacity of choice. Self-awareness. Unlike any other creature on the planet, we have this self-awareness that we can think about ourselves and look at ourselves and improve ourselves and challenge ourselves to become something different than we were today. And in that free will, we have the capacity to choose to love others or reject. This same God who created all things, created us for his family, gave us this capacity of free will, also knew that every one of us would struggle in finding our bearings in life because we ultimately want to please ourselves. And while we want other things we want life to be better, we're happy to settle with just gratification. And it leads us away from him over time. And so this same God that created all entered it, and that's what we just celebrated at Christmas time. He became a part of it, and he redeemed it. And you're not going to find all the answers in one day. You're not going to understand it all. What does it mean to follow Jesus? Why did God do all this, and how did he do it all? It takes time, but here's what I want to leave you with today. It's reasonable, it's rational, it's logical. And if you seek, you will find. If you're looking for unanswered questions and reasons not to believe against God, you can find things that you don't understand, reasons to hold God at a distance and say, nope, We can't explain this. We don't understand that. It doesn't make sense trying to fit God into our box. You can do that. Or we can settle that the pile of rocks tells us somebody made that. The vehicle sitting in the parking lot tells us there's somebody behind that. And all of this tells us there's something more. And that something more, friends, is God. And you can spend the rest of your life running from him, or you can start drawing near. You can start engaging him and talking to him and finding out what he has to say about your life. And the good news is he gave us an instruction manual, right? He gave us a roadmap. He gave us the story. And that's what this is. It's God's story. And this story continues to unfold in each of our lives. And today, as we close, I just want to ask, is God tugging on your heart today? Did all of a sudden God become real? God become relevant? And if so, I want to give you a chance to say a simple prayer to draw near to the Lord. What we celebrated just a few days ago is that God became flesh, that he walked among us. His name was Jesus Christ of Nazareth, and as a human being, God did for mankind what we couldn't do for ourselves. And then he said this, come and follow me. Come and be my friend. Come and be my children. Come and love me as I have loved you. When you said I do, those of us that are married, did you understand everything about that person? Did you know them completely? No. And you won't with God either. It's going to take time of maturing in that relationship. The question is, do you want the relationship? Let's close our eyes. If it's in your heart, for the very first time perhaps, to say yes to that relationship with Jesus, then I want to invite you to say a simple prayer. And if today you would say, well, I was in that relationship, but I was unfaithful. I drifted in my affection, my loyalty, and started getting back into the world. But today you feel the Lord tugging on your heart to renew that commitment, to renew your vows, if you will, to the Lord. I want to invite you to pray this same prayer as a recommitment. So pray this with us. Say, Father God, in the name of Jesus, I confess and I acknowledge that I have been wrong and I have done my own thing and I have ran from the obvious that there is a God, that he is real, that he wants me, that he loves me, and has a purpose for my life, that he has redeemed me from myself. And this day, I embrace that God. I declare Jesus as Lord of my life. And from this day forward, devote myself to growing in that relationship and becoming who he made me to be. Help me, God, to never stray, to never be unfaithful, and to never fall away. In Jesus' name, amen. If you prayed that prayer for the first time or